Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Zara and today I'm going to be doing a review of Fireborne by Rosaria Munda. This is the first book in the Aurelian cycle. I have only read the first book at the time that I'm filming this video. And this is a YA fantasy with dragons. It's very political and the first book is set in a school setting. We follow two POVs and these two POVs are both victims of a regime change that happened when they were both children and they are now a part of this new regime. At the start of this book, they are both competing to essentially secure their role in the regime, and they're competing against each other. It's very much an academic setting. There is very much a military aspect to it. So I would definitely compare this to a book like Fourth Wing by Rebecca Yarros, but it's just so much better because it's just so good. It's really good, and I'm going to spend the next 5-10 minutes telling you why it's so good. Before I jump into that though, I will just say I don't typically read YA now. It's very rare for me to read YA because typically I don't like how it's written, I don't like the tropes, I typically don't like the character types as well. I find often that the characters feel very naive and juvenile. That's not to say that I have everything figured out, I most certainly do not, and I don't claim to, but I think when you get older, or as you get older, you handle situations with a certain level of maturity that you don't when you're, a teenager or a young adult. I've always been wary reading YA, but this is one of the few YA books that I've been quite curious to read. And I do want to particularly shout out Cheryl, who I buddy read this with, because she kind of made me really excited about it. So we picked up the first book in the month of October, and as you can probably gather from what I've already said, I really love this book. This book is really good. This is what I want when I say I just want well-written popcorn fiction. And I don't mean to use the word popcorn fiction in a negative way, because sometimes I want something that I can just completely get absorbed into and I don't have to think too deep about it, but I'm completely taken in by what is happening. And that's exactly what happened in this book. It kind of reminds me of An Ember in the Ashes, which is another YA series by Sabaa Tahir that I really loved. It's one of the few YA series that I actually really enjoyed. And I definitely think there are parallels between these two series, at least what I've read so far. And overall, I just think it's a really solid first book, and I'm so excited to see where it goes. So let's get started into what I enjoyed about it. I really loved the writing. There is a certain level of simplicity that I expect with YA writing, and I think sometimes authors, YA authors in particular, try to overcomplicate it, and you don't always need to do that. And I think with this sort of story, it's not needed. And I think Rosaria Munda did an absolutely phenomenal job of writing in a way that just felt very pacey. I couldn't stop reading it, and I read this book in 3 days. It's not a huge book, but it's also not a small book, right? And yet I got through it so quickly because I just wanted to keep reading. It felt very addictive. And as I mentioned earlier, it's a dual POV story, and both of these characters are so compelling. It's very rare that I read a dual POV or a multi-POV book where I love both characters or all the characters equally. I have to say, I really did love them equally in this book. I was excited to read both POVs. They both stand alone as very incredibly well-developed characters. I'll come on to characters more in a second. The pacing was fantastic. Every single chapter is just one thing after the other, but it doesn't feel ridiculous. It doesn't feel like there's too much happening. It just feels like the system is breaking down and these characters are trying to figure out how to not only come to terms with the system breaking down, but with their own identity within that broader system, which I loved. I love that thematic exploration, which I'll come on to themes a little bit later on, but this is a book about revolution, about rebellion. It's about breaking systems that are fundamentally broken and rotted at the core. And with a lot of these types of books, you're going to get a lot of the same exploration around what does it take to build a system? I love how I said I'll come on to themes in a minute, but I'm going to talk about themes now, I guess. What does it take to really rebuild a system from the ground up that is not only advantageous to the top, but to everybody involved? But also more intimately, it talks about things like, how do we make sure that the people who are on the fringes of that society, how do they get represented? How do they get opportunity in a way that is equal to everybody else? And that is a discussion that I personally find very interesting, because it's never not going to be relevant. It's never not going to be an important discussion to have. So I think she really delicately weaves a multitude of different themes together in a way that feels very honest. It feels very grounded. I think a lot of people can probably relate to some of the thematic work that is discussed. And I just loved it. I just loved how she approached it. So let's move on to characters now. We have our two main characters, Annie and Lee. Both of these characters are in terms of their background, on the fringes of society. Annie, she comes from a poor family who were murdered, and that's not necessarily a spoiler. You learn that very early on in the book. And she comes from a system that basically tried to erode her sense of self and her family's sense of being, and her people's sense of being. Lee is the opposite. He comes from the previous regime. He comes from the family of the previous regime, and he is trying to fit into a system that basically tried to destroy him. So they're both victims in the way that both of them have had their identity eroded, and they're trying to hide their identity, and they're trying to fit into a system that essentially vilified them in a way. The interesting thing is that Lee's family is the family that negatively impacted Annie's family. So while Lee is a victim of the current regime, Annie is a victim of the previous regime. It's a very interesting dynamic because they have a friendship, but they've also had to come to terms with the kind of really horrible realizations that they have to kind of face in terms of like what's led them to their positions in society. And that's not through their own actions, that's through their parents' actions. And they're having to live with the consequences of those decisions and those actions that have happened when they were children. I think it is beautifully explored, to be honest. Like, I think it's explored in such a raw way. And I really appreciated it. Like, I really, really appreciated it. I thought it was handled very delicately. And we have empathy for both of these characters, even though they're kind of on opposite sides in many ways. So I loved it. I love both of these characters for different reasons. I love Lee because I think he's so self-aware. He's so self-aware and he tries to be better. And he has to sacrifice a lot of himself in order to be better. And I can only commend someone who does that. Annie I love because she's so intelligent, but people overlook her because of her family. And because she's not, she doesn't come from a certain breed of people or a certain class of people, which is ridiculous, right? In my opinion, we should assess people based on who they are as a person, their character, what they bring to the world. Not necessarily in terms of what they produce. I mean, just in terms of who they are, how they think, their character, their integrity, their honesty, their truth. And Annie represents that to me. She's just so much integrity. And she's just such a wonderful character to be. It's just so wonderful to be in her head because she's also very self-aware, but in many ways she's also not. She doesn't realise how much she can offer to the world, and that in itself is like a journey that she has to go through, which I love for her. Both of these characters are amazing. There is a secondary cast of characters that is also very well developed. I'm very excited to see where our two main characters end up, but also where that secondary cast of characters, like how they develop and how they also add to the broader world. The other thing that I will mention is that there is a romance element to this book, but I have to say I really liked how it was handled. I don't like romance in my books anymore. At least I don't like it being the focal point. And I was wary about this book because I was worried, like with a lot of YA series, romance is often a big part of the story. It is a part of the story, but I would say it's very much secondary. I also like the way it was handled. It wasn't, cringy. It didn't feel like it was there for the sake of it. It had a purpose. I think it was executed very well in terms of fulfilling the purpose that it played. So while I'm not necessarily a big fan of romance, I think she handled it very well in this book. It's very much a secondary element. And because the characters are so likable, you don't mind being in their heads as they come to terms with these various different romantic relationships that they have. The other thing that I will mention, and there is both a good side to this and then my only critique of this book, is the magic system. The magic system is very basic, and I like basic magic systems. I don't think we need the most complex magic system for it to be compelling. I think as long as it is very clear what it is, what the rules are around it, and how the various characters can embody it, I'm happy with that. I don't need it to be, super convoluted. I really liked it. I think it was very simple, did what it needed to do. It's very much tied to the dragons in this world. And that's kind of where my one critique of this book comes in, which is that we didn't really get much exploration around the dragons. Now, if you look at a book like Fourth Wing, which I absolutely detested because I just think it's the biggest piece of garbage ever written, because it's just so poorly written. Like, for me, Fourth Wing could have easily been Fireborne if it had been written with actual care and if it had actually been thought out and the characters actually like were compelling, right? Like, they're very similar in many regards, and I think Fireborne is like what Fourth Wing was trying to do, but just like infinitely better. And the one thing though in Fourth Wing is that we actually get a decent amount of exploration around the dragons. The dragons are actually characters in themselves. We don't get that in this book, and while I don't mind that, I think I would have liked a bit more exploration around the lore around the dragons. Like, I wanted to learn more about how the dragons and the humans are connected, how they pick their human rider. Like, there is a bit around that, but I just wanted more. I'm really hoping we get more of this in books 2 and 3. So, I mean, that was my main critique, because I just had lots of questions around the dragons and how the magic between the dragons and the riders works. Like, we get some of it, just not as much as I would have liked personally, but that's just because I'm generally quite interested in that stuff. So I hope we get more of that in books 2 and 3. I'm really excited to see where this story goes, because I really do think it is fantastic. I think if you're somebody like me who doesn't read YA at all, give this one a go. Like, it's a quick read, it's very addictive, the characters are very, very well written, and it's also very political, and I'm really excited to see the world broaden out as we progress through the trilogy. So I did give this book, like I said, I did give this book a 4.75 stars. It was really, really good. My main critique was the dragons. I want more, I hope we get more, and overall it was just an absolutely fantastic book to read. So let me know down below in the comments if you've read it. Let me know as well if you've read books 2 and 3 and if we do get more dragon lore, because I am particularly interested in that part of the book and the world. But I just loved it, and I'm really curious to hear, folks, like, if you've read it, did you like it as well? And if you have read it, why didn't you like it? Because I do think this is a really, really solid series. Just fantasy series in general, not just a YA fantasy series. So see you down below in the comments. I'm always excited to talk about books that we love, and I'll see you in my next video, folks. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please do give it a thumbs up, and I will see you in my next one. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you very, very soon. Bye.